The auctioneer's gavel slammed down with the force of thunder. The Sheriff Coltrane Voss stepped forward with a leather pouch heavy enough to silence the entire town square. $500, he declared, his weathered hands steady despite the tremor in his voice. The crowd gasped, as one $500 could buy half the storefronts on Main Street, yet here was their sheriff. Bidding on Magnolia Sinclair like she was nothing more than livestock, Magnolia stood on the auction block. Her chin raised defiantly despite the iron shackles around her wrists. Her dress, once fine silk, now hung in tatters from 3 weeks in the county jail, but her emerald eyes blazed with unbroken spirit. When those eyes met Coltrane's across the jeering crowd, something electric passed between them, the same spark that had ignited 2 months ago when he'd first arrested her. For running an illegal gambling den? Going once, the auctioneer called, his voice cutting through the murmur of scandalized townspeople. Mrs. Prudence Wickham. The mayor's wife fanned herself so vigorously, she nearly toppled from her perch on the church steps. "This is unseemly," she shrieked. "A sheriff purchasing a criminal. What will become of our moral standing?" But Coltrane didn't care about moral standing. He cared about the way Magnolia had looked at him during those long nights he'd stood guard outside her cell, the way she'd whispered stories of her childhood in New Orleans, the way she'd made him laugh for the first time since his wife died. In the cholera outbreak, cared about the tears she'd tried to hide when Judge Cromwell sentenced her to be sold into indentured servitude to pay her debts, going twice. A voice rang out from the back of the crowd. 600 was Silas Moorcock, the town's wealthiest rancher and biggest scoundrel. His leering smile made Coltrane's stomach turn. Everyone knew what happened to the pretty women Moorcock, but they disappeared into his sprawling ranch house and were never seen in town again. The crowd turned to watch this unprecedented bidding war. Never in Willow Creek's 30-year history had an auction created such a spectacle. Children pressed against their mothers' skirts, sensing the adult tensions they couldn't understand. Men shifted uncomfortably, torn between their respect for the sheriff and their shock at his unprecedented action. Magnolia's eyes widened as she looked between the two men fighting over her fate. Coltrane saw fear flicker across her features. For the first time since he'd known her, not fear of being owned, but fear of being owned by the wrong man. 700, Coltrane called out, his voice carrying the authority that had kept peace in this town for 8 years. The pouch in his hands contained every penny he'd saved, every dollar earned from his meager sheriff's salary, every coin he'd planned to spend on a small farm where he could retire in peace. Moorcock's face darkened. 800. The crowd held its collective breath. This was more money than most of them would see in 5 years. Magnolia's hands trembled as she gripped the auction block's rough wooden edge. Coltrane met her eyes once more, seeing not a criminal or a commodity, but the woman who'd stolen his heart through prison bars. $1,000, he said quietly, and the words fell like stones into still water. The silence that followed. Coltrane's final bid stretched like a taut rope ready to snap. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned, his gavel frozen midair as he processed the astronomical sum. $1,000 more money than the town's annual budget for road, repairs, and civic improvements combined. Silas Moorcock's face turned purple with rage, but his hand remained at his side. Everyone knew the rancher was wealthy, but even he wouldn't throw away that much money on a woman, no matter how beautiful. With a disgusted snort, he shouldered through the crowd and mounted his horse, spurring it viciously as he rode toward his ranch. Sold to Sheriff Voss. The auctioneer finally managed, bringing his gavel down with shaking hands. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some townspeople cheered. They'd never liked Moorcock and his cruel ways. Others muttered darkly about corruption. In scandal, Mrs. Wickham looked ready to faint dead away, while her husband, Mayor Wickham, mopped his sweating brow with a silk handkerchief. Coltrane climbed onto the platform and carefully unlocked Magnolia's shackles with the key Judge Cromwell had given him. Her wrists bore angry red marks from the iron, and without thinking, he gently rubbed circulation back into her hands. The intimate gesture sent another wave of whispers through the watching crowd. "Why?" Magnolia whispered, her voice barely audible. Above the commotion, "You've spent everything, haven't you?" "It's not everything," Coltrane replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "I've got what matters most." Before she could respond, Judge Cromwell approached with the necessary papers. "Sheriff Voss, Miss Sinclair is now bound to 7 years of service to repay her debts. The terms are standard room, board, and reasonable compensation for her labor. Understood, Your Honor." Coltrane signed the documents with steady strokes, officially making Magnolia his indentured servant. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. He'd become her legal owner to keep her free. As they made their way through the dispersing crowd toward his modest house on Elm Street, the weight of what he'd done began to settle on Coltrane's shoulders. Conversation stopped as they passed. Curtains twitched in windows. Children were hurried inside by disapproving mothers. "They hate me," Magnolia observed quietly. "They hate what they don't understand," Coltrane corrected. "Give them time." But time seemed to be in short supply. Before they'd even reached his front gate, Deputy Marshal Thorne came running up the street, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. Sheriff Voss, you need to come quick." Coltrane's hand instinctively moved to his gun belt. "What's the trouble, Thorne?" "The town council. They've called an emergency meeting. Mrs. Wickham's demanding your badge, saying you've brought shame on the office." The young deputy's eyes darted nervously to Magnolia. "They want to see you immediately." The irony was bitter. He'd spent his life savings to save the woman he loved, only to risk losing the position that gave him the authority to protect her. Without his sheriff's badge, he'd be just another citizen, powerless against men like Moorcock, who saw women as property too, be used and discarded. "Go," Magnolia said softly. "I'll wait at your house." But Coltrane shook his head. "We go together. What affects me affects you now." He turned to Deputy Thorne. "Tell the council I'll be there in 10 minutes. And Thorne, shh, make sure they understand. I'm bringing Miss Sinclair with me. She has a right to hear what's being said about her." As they walked toward the town hall, Magnolia slipped her hand into his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a declaration of war against everyone who would tear them apart. The town hall buzzed with hostile energy as Coltrane and Magnolia entered together. The 5 council members sat behind a long wooden table like judges at a tribunal, their faces grave and disapproving. Mrs. Wickham occupied the center seat, her usual position as the mayor's wife, elevated to something approaching royal authority. The gallery behind them was packed with townspeople, all eager to witness the sheriff's downfall. Sheriff Voss, Mrs. Wickham began without preamble. "Your conduct today has been nothing short of disgraceful. To use your position and influence to purchase a criminal for your own personal ... purposes is a violation of everything this office stands for." Coltrane removed his hat respectfully, but kept his shoulders square. "Mrs. Wickham, members of the council, I purchased Miss Sinclair's indenture with my own money, earned through honest work. I've broken no laws, but you've broken every moral code," interrupted Councilman Jeremiah Brass, the town's Methodist minister. "The sheriff is meant to be above reproach, a beacon of righteousness for our community. How can you enforce God's law when you're living in sin?" "I'm not living in sin," Coltrane replied calmly. "Miss Sinclair will have her own room, her own space. She'll work as my housekeeper and assistant, nothing more." Magnolia squeezed his hand, understanding the sacrifice those words represented. She knew as well as he did that they were lying not about his intentions to treat her with respect, but about the feelings that burned between them like wildfire. "And we're supposed to believe that?" sneered Councilman Otto Grimm, who owned the general store. "A man doesn't spend $1,000 on a housekeeper. You could hire 10 Mexican girls for that price." The casual racism in Grimm's words made Coltrane's jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "My financial decisions are my own affair as long as they don't interfere with my duties. But they do interfere." Mrs. Wickham slammed her hand on the table. "Already the whole town is talking. Decent families won't want their children associating with either of you. Property values will suffer. Our reputation will be ruined." The gallery, a surprising voice spoke up. "Hold on just a minute, Prudence." It was Dr. Ezekiel Cartwright, the town's elderly physician and one of its most respected citizens. He stood slowly, his cane tapping against the wooden floor. I've known Coltrane Voss for 8 years. He's kept the peace, protected our families, and asked for nothing in return. If he wants to spend his own money to keep a young woman from Silas Moorcock's clutches, I say that's Christian charity, not scandal. A murmur of agreement rippled through part of the crowd, but Mrs. Wickham's face reddened with indignation. Dr. Cartwright, surely you can't condone this. ... This arrangement. I condone a man following his conscience, Dr. Cartwright replied firmly. And I've seen what happens to the women who end up at Moorcock's ranch. Sheriff Voss can spare one soul from that fate, he has my blessing. But the council wasn't swayed. Mayor Wickham cleared his throat nervously. Sheriff Voss, while we appreciate your ... humanitarian concerns, the fact remains that your actions have created a scandal. Perhaps it would be best if you took a leave of absence until this matter dies down. And who would keep the peace? Coltrane asked. Deputy. Thorne is barely 20 years old and has never faced anything more dangerous than a drunk cowboy. We could ask the county to send a temporary marshal, suggested Councilman Brass. Who would answer to you instead of the people, Coltrane observed. How convenient. The truth was becoming clear. This wasn't really about morality or scandal. It was about power. The town council had always resented having a sheriff who couldn't be bought or bullied, who answered to justice rather than their petty political games. Magnolia stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. May I speak? Mrs. Wickham looked affronted. This is not your place, girl. You're nothing but an indentured servant now. I'm a citizen of this town for the next 7 years, Magnolia replied coolly. And I have something to say about the man you're trying to destroy. The gallery fell silent as Magnolia moved to the center of the room, her green eyes blazing with determination. Despite her torn dress and the red marks still visible on her wrists, she carried herself with the dignity of a queen addressing her court. You want to talk about morality and righteousness? She began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall. Then let me tell you about Sheriff Coltrane Voss. When he arrested me, I fought him like a wildcat. I scratched his face, tried to knee him where it would hurt most, and called him every foul name I'd learned in the gambling halls of New Orleans. Gasps echoed through the crowd at her frank admission, but Magnolia continued undaunted. He could have struck me down, as many lawmen would. Instead, he treated me with respect. When I was sick with fever in that cell, he brought me medicine from his own supplies. When Mrs. Coopersmith's boy threw rocks at me through the jail window, Sheriff Voss made him sweep the courthouse steps for a week and write me a letter of apology. Dr. Cartwright nodded approvingly, remembering the incident. Several other townspeople shifted uncomfortably, recalling their own harsh treatment of the prisoner. And when Judge Cromwell sentenced me to indentured servitude, I saw the look in Silas Moorcock's eyes. I knew what my fate would be in his hands. Magnolia's voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. Sheriff Voss didn't have to save me. He didn't owe me anything. But he spent every penny he had to keep me from a life of degradation and abuse. Mrs. Wickham's face was pale with fury. Pretty words from a convicted criminal. How do we know this isn't all planned? Perhaps you seduced our sheriff into this? Foolishness. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Coltrane started forward, his hand moving toward his weapon, but Magnolia held up a restraining hand. You want to know the truth about seduction, Mrs. Wickham? Magnolia's smile was sharp as a blade. Then ask your husband about the night he came to my gambling parlor and lost $50 trying to impress a saloon girl named Ruby. Ask him about the love letters he wrote to her, letters I still have hidden away. Mayor Wickham went white as fresh snow, while his wife turned to stare at him with dawning horror. The revelation sent a shock wave through the crowd. Their moral crusader was a hypocrite of the highest order. You're lying. Yes, Mrs. Wickham shrieked. But her husband's guilty expression told the whole story. I have 12 witnesses, Magnolia continued calmly, and the letters are in his own handwriting. Shall I retrieve them from my belongings? Councilman Brass looked ready to bolt for the door, while Otto Grimm suddenly found the floor very interesting. Only Dr. Cartwright seemed unsurprised by the revelation. That's enough, Mayor Wickham finally found his voice. This has nothing to do with Sheriff Voss's conduct, doesn't it? Magnolia turned to face the crowd. You're all so quick to judge a man who's protected you for 8 years, but you've never questioned your own leaders? At least Sheriff Voss paid his own money for what he wanted. How many of you know where your tax dollars really go? The implication was clear, and several council members exchanged nervous glances. Magnolia had just declared war on the town's power structure, using information gathered during months of running an illegal establishment. Where men revealed their secrets over cards and whiskey, Coltrane felt a mixture of admiration and terror. Magnolia was magnificent in her fury, but she was also making enemies of people who could destroy them both. "Miss Sinclair," he said quietly, "perhaps we should know." Her voice was firm. "They want to take your badge because you chose love over their approval, but they're not worthy to judge either of us." The truth of her words rang through the hall like church bells, and for the first time since the meeting began, some of the townspeople looked ashamed rather than angry. The tension in the town hall was thick enough to cut with a knife when the door suddenly burst open. Deputy Thorne stumbled in, his face flushed from running, his uniform disheveled and dirty. "Sheriff, thank God you're here," he gasped, clutching a telegram in his trembling hand. "We got word from the county seat Moorcock's ranch hands just burned out the Jennings family homestead. 3 children are missing, and old Pete Jennings is barely alive." The room fell silent as the weight of Thorne's words sank in. The Jennings family had been trying to prove up their claim on a piece of land Moorcock wanted for grazing. Everyone knew there'd been bad blood between them. No one had expected violence. Coltrane stepped forward, his personal troubles forgotten in the face of duty. "How long ago? Maybe 2 hours? Doc Cartwright, they're asking for you too. Mrs. Jennings has burns on her hands and arms." Dr. Cartwright was already reaching for his medical bag. "I'll ride out immediately." But Mrs. Wickham wasn't ready to. "Let the crisis derail her vendetta. Deputy Thorne can handle this matter. We're in the middle of important council business." "With respect, ma'am," Thorne replied, his young face grave beyond his years. "This ain't something I can handle alone. Those ranch hands are armed and dangerous, and they're on Moorcock's land now, where they think they're untouchable." Coltrane was already checking his gun belt, his mind shifting into the cold calculation that had kept him alive through years of dangerous work. How many men are we talking about? At least 6, maybe more. They're holed up in the bunkhouse, drinking, and celebrating like they won some kind of victory. The room buzzed with nervous energy. This was the kind of crisis that Willow Creek hadn't seen in years, the sort of violence that happened when powerful men thought they were above the law. Sheriff Voss, Councilman Brass, spoke up, his voice strained. "Surely you can see that your current situation makes you unsuitable to handle such a delicate matter. Perhaps we should contact the county marshal after all." "The county marshal is 3 days' ride away," Coltrane replied curtly. "Those children could be dead by then." Magnolia stepped forward, her eyes blazing with sudden understanding. "This isn't coincidence. Moorcock planned this, the timing, everything. He knew you'd be distracted by the council meeting, knew the town would be divided. He's making his move while he thinks you're weak." Her words rang true. Moorcock had been frustrated by Coltrane's refusal to look the other way when his ranch hands caused trouble in town. The sheriff's purchase of Magnolia had given the rancher the perfect excuse to strike back. Knowing the town's moral guardians would tie Coltrane's hands with scandal and politics, all the more reason why someone else should handle this, Mrs. Wickham insisted. "The sheriff's judgment is clearly compromised." "My judgment is fine," Coltrane said coldly. "And I took an oath to protect the people of this county, not to bow to your petty politics." He turned to address the crowd, riding out to Moorcock's ranch to arrest the men who burned out the Jennings family and to bring back those children. Any man who wants to ride with me is welcome. Any man who doesn't can stay here and debate my moral character while those kids suffer." Several men in the crowd stepped forward, farmers and storekeepers who'd known the Jennings family, who understood that this attack threatened every small homesteader in the valley. Dr. Cartwright adjusted his bag and nodded grimly. But it was Magnolia who surprised everyone. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not," Coltrane said immediately. "You'll need someone who knows Moorcock's weaknesses," she replied. "He spent plenty of time at my gambling parlor, boasting about his ranch, his security, his escape routes. I know that place better than anyone, except his own men. The logic was sound, but the danger was enormous. Taking Magnolia into a gunfight would be madness, except that leaving her behind in a town that already hated her might be even more dangerous. "This is insanity," Mrs. Wickham shrieked. "You're talking about taking a criminal into an armed confrontation?" "Talking about saving 3 children," Coltrane replied, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had made him legendary. "In the territory, anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me later." The posse rode hard across the scrubland toward Moorcock's ranch, dust clouds marking their passage like war paint against the evening sky. Coltrane led the group of 8 men, with Magnolia riding beside him on a borrowed mare. Dr. Cartwright brought up the rear, his medical bag secured behind his saddle, his face grim with determination. As they crested the ridge overlooking the Moorcock spread, the full scope of the ranch's defenses became clear. The main house sat in the center of a compound surrounded by bunkhouses, corrals, and outbuildings. Guards were posted at strategic points. The men they'd come for were clearly visible through the windows of the largest bunkhouse. Their celebration loud enough to carry across the evening air? Their Magnolia pointed to a cluster of buildings. "Near the eastern edge of the compound. It's where he keeps the workers' families. If those children are alive, that's where they'll be." Coltrane studied the layout through his field glasses, noting the sightlines and escape routes. The ranch was built like a fortress, designed to repel Indian raids or rival cattlemen. Taking it by direct assault would be suicide for a small posse. "We need a diversion," he murmured, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. "I can give you one," Magnolia said quietly. "Moorcock's been wanting to get his hands on me since the day you arrested me. If I ride in alone, he'll call off his guards to watch the show." "Over my dead body?" Coltrane replied immediately. "That might be exactly what happens if we don't get those children out alive," she shot back. "You know I'm right." "While his men are distracted watching him humiliate me, you can circle around and hit them from behind." The plan had merit, but the risk to Magnolia was enormous. Moorcock was known for his cruelty to women. He had particular reason to hate her now that she'd cost him $1,000 at the auction. "There has to be another way," Dr. Cartwright interjected, having overheard their whispered conversation, but time was running short. Already the shadows were lengthening, and night operations would favor the defenders who knew the terrain. They needed to move soon, or risk losing the children entirely. "Give me 10 minutes, Magnolia said, dismounting and checking the small derringer hidden in her boot. "When you hear gunfire, come running." Before Coltrane could stop her, she was back in the saddle and spurring her horse down the slope toward the ranch compound. His heart hammered against his ribs as he watched her approach the main gate, her figure growing smaller and more vulnerable with each stride. The guards at the gate recognized her immediately, their shouts bringing Moorcock himself out onto the porch of his sprawling house. Even at this distance, Coltrane could see the man's predatory smile as he gestured for his men to bring Magnolia inside. "Jesus," breathed Deputy Thorne, who'd insisted on joining the posse despite his youth. "She's got more courage than the rest of us combined." Coltrane forced himself to wait, counting the seconds as his posse spread out according to their plan. Dr. Cartwright would approach the workers' quarters from the north, while the others created a corridor of escape to the south. Everything depended on timing and Magnolia's ability to keep Moorcock's attention focused on her. Instead of his prisoners, the sound of breaking glass echoed across the compound as Magnolia apparently threw something at her captor. Raucous laughter followed, along with shouted encouragement from the ranch hands. Whatever she was doing, it was working. Most of the guards had abandoned their posts to crowd around the main house windows. Now Coltrane whispered, and his men moved like ghosts through the gathering twilight. They reached the workers' quarters without being detected, finding 3 terrified Mexican families huddled inside a single room. But there was no sign of the Jennings children. "¿Dónde están los niños?" Dr. Cartwright asked in Spanish. An old woman pointed toward a root cellar behind the building, her eyes wide with fear. "Los hombres. They put them there," said they. "Would come back after." Coltrane's blood ran cold as he understood the implication. The children weren't just prisoners, they were being saved for something worse. The cellar door was barred from outside, and when they lifted it, 3 small faces peered up at them from the darkness below. The eldest, a boy of maybe 10, clutched his younger siblings protectively. "It's all right," Coltrane said softly. "We're here to take you home." But as they helped the children from their prison, shots rang out from the main house. Magnolia's diversion had just turned deadly. Gunfire erupted from the main house like thunder in a summer storm. And Coltrane's heart nearly stopped as he recognized the sharp crack of Magnolia's derringer among the deeper reports of the ranch hands' rifles. Glass shattered, and men shouted in confusion as the carefully planned diversion descended into chaos. "Get the children to safety," Coltrane ordered Dr. Cartwright, already running toward the sound of battle. His men spread out behind him, their weapons drawn and ready. Through the main house windows, he could see the deadly dance unfolding inside. Magnolia had overturned a heavy oak table for cover and was trading shots with 3 of Moorcock's men, while the rancher himself cowered behind his liquor cabinet. Her dress was torn and bloody, but her aim was true. One attacker lay motionless on the Persian rug, while another clutched his shoulder and cursed in Spanish. Coltrane burst through the front door with Deputy Thorne beside him. Their arrival shifting the balance of the fight. The remaining ranch hands, caught between Magnolia's position and the new threat from behind, quickly threw down their weapons and raised their hands. "It's over, Moorcock," Coltrane called out, his revolver trained on the rancher's hiding place. "Come out with your hands up." But Silas Moorcock was too consumed with rage to surrender. He rose from behind the cabinet with a shotgun in his hands. His face twisted with fury as he swung the weapon toward Magnolia. "You cost me everything, you witch," he snarled. "If I can't have you, nobody can." Time slowed to a crawl as Coltrane saw the rancher's finger tighten on the trigger. Without thinking, he threw himself across the room, his body colliding with Magnolia's just as the shotgun roared. The blast tore through the air where she'd been standing, embedding buckshot in the wall behind them. They hit the floor hard, Coltrane's weight driving the breath from Magnolia's lungs. For a moment, he thought they were both dead. Then he felt her heart beating against his chest and knew they'd survived. "Stay down," he whispered, then rolled away and put 2 bullets center mass into Moorcock's chest. The rancher dropped like a felled tree, shotgun clattering across the hardwood floor. The sudden silence was deafening after the thunderous gunfight. "Sheriff," Deputy Thorne's voice came from outside. "We've got all of them. The children are safe." Coltrane helped Magnolia to her feet, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. A graze along her left arm was bleeding freely, but it wasn't life-threatening. "You scared me to death," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Good," she replied, wincing as Dr. Cartwright appeared to tend her wound. "Maybe now you'll understand how I felt watching you bid on me at that auction." They rode back into Willow Creek as heroes. The Jennings children were safely reunited with their parents. Moorcock's gang was in custody, and the immediate threat to the valley's homesteaders had been eliminated. Word of their success had spread through town like wildfire, and even Mrs. Wickham seemed subdued as they passed the church where an impromptu prayer service was being held. The town council meeting was a much different affair than it had been. That afternoon, with Moorcock dead and his corruption exposed, the moral crusaders who'd been so eager to destroy Coltrane's reputation suddenly found themselves looking for excuses. "Sheriff Voss," Mayor Wickham said formally, his voice barely audible, "the council has voted to commend your actions today. Your badge and authority are, of course, completely restored." "They were never in question," Coltrane replied coolly. "A man doesn't need permission to do what's right." Later, as the last of the crowd dispersed, Coltrane and Magnolia stood alone on the steps of the town hall. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the evening air carried the promise of rain. 7 years, Magnolia said quietly, referring to her indenture contract. "That's a long time to wait." "Who said anything about waiting?" Coltrane replied. He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, the indenture contract he'd purchased. That morning, with deliberate ceremony, he tore it in half and let the pieces scatter on the wind. "You're free, Magnolia Sinclair. Free to stay or go as you choose." She studied his weathered face in the lamplight, seeing the love and uncertainty written there, And if I choose to stay, then I'll spend every day proving I was worth that $1,000. Magnolia laughed, the sound like silver bells in the darkness. Sheriff Coltrane Voss, you were worth every penny and more. She took his hand in hers, their fingers intertwining like their fates. But I think I'll stay anyway. Someone needs to keep you out of trouble. As they walked toward home together, free and in love, the scandal that had threatened to destroy them was already becoming legend. In years to come, when children asked about the day their sheriff bought his bride at auction, the old-timers would smile and say it was the best $1,000 ever spent in Willow Creek. The town had called him Scandalous. But love, true love, was always worth the scandal.